The first thing Zenerali noticed was the edge. She had been working on the Galactic Atlas for 11 months. It was a quiet job, the kind that suited her. She sat in a small room at the back of the survey vessel Coherent Drift, surrounded by screens full of star data, and she put it all together. Colors for star types, lines for travel routes, small dots for inhabited worlds. It was careful work, and she was good at it. The atlas was almost finished. Every region of the known galaxy had been mapped. Every civilization inside the Interstellar Governing Council had sent their survey records. Hundreds of thousands of star systems, all charted, all labeled, all filed in the right place. Then she found the blank. It was not small. It sat on the outer edge of the spiral arm, and it covered the space where several hundred star systems should have been. There were no survey flags, no color codes, no little symbol that said unexplored. Just nothing. Clean white space on the chart, as if someone had taken an eraser and wiped that whole section away. Zenerali leaned closer to her screen. She checked the data index. No entries. She searched the archive. Nothing came back except a single line of text in old Council script. Access restricted. Council Precedent 0001. She read it 3 times. Council Precedent 0001. That was the very first rule the Interstellar Governing Council had ever written. She had studied Council history. She knew the early rules, trade agreements, border laws, language protocols. She had never heard of a Precedent 0001 that involved a blank space on a map. She flagged the error in her system and sent a query to the archive department on Keth Prime. The reply came back in 2 hours. It was very short. The data for that region is classified at the highest level. Do not attempt to access it. Do not include the region in the current atlas. Leave the space blank. Zenerali stared at the message for a long time. Then she closed it and went to find her senior officer. His name was Veth Korin, and he had been doing survey work for 40 years. He was a calm person. Not much surprised him. Zenerali found him in the small eating area near the back of the ship, warming something in a heating unit. She sat down across from him and told him what she had found. He did not look surprised. He looked tired. She asked him what the blank space was. He set down his food. He folded his hands on the table. Then he said, quietly, without looking at her, "We do not map that region. We do not fly near it, and we do not ask why in writing." Zenerali waited for more. Nothing came. She asked if it was dangerous. Veth Korin picked up his food again. He said, "Leave it alone. That is the best advice I can give you. Finish the atlas. Leave the space blank. Submit the file. Go home." She left him there and went back to her screens. For 3 days she did exactly what she was told. She finished the rest of the atlas. She double-checked her star labels. She cleaned up the route lines. She did not look at the blank space, or she tried not to. But it was hard to ignore. It sat in the middle of her work like a hole in a piece of cloth, and every time she scrolled past it, she felt a small pull in her chest. On the 4th day, she ran a deep archive search. She did not search for the blank space directly. She searched for old survey missions. Specifically, she searched for any probe that had been sent toward the outer spiral arm in the last 2,000 years, and had successfully returned data. Most probes that went far out never came back. Comms failed. Navigation failed. They drifted. But some came back, and some sent signals. She found one. It was very old. The timestamp put it at nearly 900 years ago. The probe designation was a long string of numbers she did not recognize. It had been sent out from a small IGC way station near the edge of the charted region. The mission record said simply, "Long-range survey, outer spiral arm, sector undesignated." The probe had traveled for 6 years. It had crossed into the blank space. It had gathered data for approximately 4 months. Then it had turned around and come back. The data file was enormous. Hundreds of thousands of readings, star compositions, atmospheric scans, radiation levels, all of it locked behind the same restriction code as before. She could not open any of it. But there was one file she could open. It was the probe's final transmission log. Simple text, the kind of automatic record the probe sent before shutdown. She opened it. The log was almost empty. There were a few lines of technical readouts, power levels, navigation confirmation, nothing interesting. And then, at the very end, there was a short block of text that did not look automatic. It looked like it had been added by a person, someone at the way station maybe. Someone who had received the probe and read its data and written down a single note before filing everything away and locking it behind the highest security code the Council had. The note was one word, written in 17 different languages, one after another, filling the last line of the log. The word was, alive. Zen Arali sat back in her chair. The screen glowed quietly in front of her. Outside the small window beside her desk, the stars were still and cold and very far away. She thought about the blank space on her atlas. She thought about Vethkoran's face when she had asked him about it. She thought about the first rule the Council had ever written. Then she thought about that word, in 17 languages, written by someone who had clearly needed everyone to understand it. Alive. And when she went back to work the next morning, the blank space seemed larger than it had before. Thesavon had worked in the IGC Central Archive for 212 years, and he had never once found a door he could not eventually open. He was old by any measure, old enough to remember when the Council had only 40 member species instead of 93, old enough to have held records in his hands that no longer existed in any other form. He had spent his whole life in the deep stacks of Keth Prime, in the cold and quiet rooms where history was kept. He was good at finding things, better than anyone else in the building, maybe better than anyone else alive. The message he received was not signed. It came through 3 different relay stations, each one a dead end, each one disconnected from any registered sender. Whoever sent it had gone to a great deal of trouble to make sure they could not be found. The message itself was short. It said only, Subvault 7. Physical key. You have the clearance if you know where to look. Thesavon had read the message 6 times before he did anything about it. Then he had gone looking for the key. The physical key to Subvault 7 was not in any directory. But Thesavon knew how old systems worked. He knew that in the early days of the Council, when they did not yet trust digital locks with their most sensitive material, they had made physical keys and given 1 piece each to the 4 founding species. The pieces had to be brought together to open the vault. A safety measure. No single species could access it alone. It had taken him 3 weeks and several procedural loopholes that he was fairly sure had never been intended for this purpose. But he had done it. The 4 pieces of the keys sat on the table in front of him. The vault door was open, and Thesavon walked inside. The subvault was small, cold. The shelves were made of old stone material that no one used anymore. The records on them were not digital. They were physical, printed on material that did not decay. Some of them had the texture of something so old it had been made before the Council existed. He did not know where to start, so he started at the beginning. The first records were from a species called the Draven. Thesavon knew the name. Everyone in the archive knew it. The Draven were one of the oldest spacefaring civilizations that had ever existed, and they were gone now, had been gone for 11,000 years. The official record said their sun had destabilized, a natural event, tragic but not unusual. The records in Subvault 7 told a different story. The Draven had been explorers. They had gone further than almost anyone in their age. They had reached the outer spiral arm at a time when most species were still learning to cross their own solar systems. And they had found the blank space. Not blank then, of course, full of stars, full of something. They had sent a probe in first. The probe came back with strange data. Readings that did not match any known pattern. Signs of civilization, yes, but also signs of damage on a scale the Draven instruments could barely measure. Something had happened to that region, something enormous. The Draven called it the ashfall in their records. They did not know what had caused it. They could only see the aftermath. They had sent a scout ship next. The scout ship came back. Its crew were quiet. They filed their reports and then asked for reassignment. None of them ever talked about what they had seen. Their reports were sealed almost immediately. Then the Draven had sent a fleet. 30 ships, full crew, research teams, diplomats, military escort. They had crossed into that region with all the confidence of a civilization that had never met anything it could not handle. Only one ship came back. Thesavon read that section 3 times. He checked the date stamps. He checked the source codes. The records were genuine. One ship out of 30 had returned. Its captain had written a final report, and that report was here in the vault. And Thesavon read it slowly and carefully in the cold, quiet room. The captain had not been frightened. That was the strange part. The report was calm, almost respectful. She wrote that what they had found inside that region was not what they had expected. They had expected ruins. The data suggested a civilization that had nearly been destroyed. Rubble. Survivors struggling. Something that might need help or might need to be avoided. What they found instead was a civilization that had gone through something no one should have survived, and had come out the other side as something different. Not destroyed, not struggling, something else. Something that the Draven fleet had seen and had not been able to fully understand. The captain wrote, "They do not understand what they have become. I am not sure we understand it either. I am not sure any language we have is the right language for what we saw." She had recommended that the Draven leave that region alone. Leave it alone and tell no one and never go back. The Draven Council had not listened. They had sent a second fleet. That fleet did not come back at all. After that there were no more Draven records. Not because they had all been destroyed, because the Draven themselves were gone. 11,000 years ago, their sun had destabilized. A natural event. Tragic, but not unusual. That was the official story, and Thesavon had believed it his whole life. He was not sure he believed it anymore. He kept reading. The vault had records from other species too, all of them pre-IGC, all of them from civilizations that had sent ships toward the outer spiral arm, and come back with information they had then buried as deeply as they could. The pattern was always the same. Curiosity, approach, something unexpected, silence. And then much later, the council itself. The IGC had been founded partly because of what was in this vault. The founding species had pooled their knowledge and looked at all these records together, and had made a decision. The decision was Precedent 0001. Do not map that region. Do not send ships there. Do not make contact. Do not explain the rule to anyone who does not need to know. But there was a note attached to the precedent. It was written by the oldest of the founding species, the Veil, who had existed for so long that their oldest records overlapped with the earliest signs of the thing in the blank space. The note was short. Thesavon read it twice. It said, "They do not stay dead. Do not provoke, but do not fear. Simply wait. They will find us when they are ready." Thesavon sat down on the cold floor of the vault because his legs felt strange. He sat there for a long time with the record in his hands. The thing in the blank space had a name. The Veil had recorded it. The name was simple, a single word in a very old language, and what it meant, translated into modern council speech, was, "Those who remained." But there was one more thing in the vault that Thesavon had not expected. It was a communications log, recent, not ancient. The dates ran back 800 years, and the entries repeated on a regular schedule, once every 100 years or so. Each entry was the same, a diplomatic message, polite, formal, written in 17 different languages, including every major council tongue. sent from somewhere inside the blank space, aimed outward, toward the IGC. Each message said something to the effect of, "We are here. We know you know we are here. We are ready to talk whenever you are." 800 years of messages. 800 years of the Council receiving them, logging them, and saying nothing back. Thesavon closed the records carefully and put them back on the shelf, exactly as he had found them. He locked the vault. He reassembled the key and returned each piece to its place. He walked back through the long, cold corridors of the archive to his office, sat down at his desk, and stared at the wall for a very long time. He thought about the blank space on the Galactic Atlas that every cartographer was told to leave empty. He thought about a civilization that had survived something called the ashfall, something so enormous that the Draven captain had not had words for it, and had come out the other side and waited patiently for 800 years for someone to write back. He thought about what it meant that no one had. And then Thesavon did something he had never done in 212 years of working in the archive. He wrote a report that he knew was going to cause a great deal of trouble, and he filed it under his own name, and he sent it to every member of the IGC Council simultaneously. He titled it simply, "We have been very rude." Ambassador Droveth had not wanted this assignment. He wanted to make that very clear, even if only to himself, even if no one else was listening. He had been a diplomat for 31 years. He had handled trade disputes and border disagreements, and 2 separate occasions where member species had nearly gone to war over fishing rights in shared nebula systems. He was good at his job. Careful, methodical. He did not take unnecessary risks, and he did not go places that sensible people did not go. And yet here he was, on a council vessel called the Measured Step, crossing into the blank space on the Galactic Atlas. It was the fault of Councillor Veth Oren, who Droveth had disagreed with publicly at a state dinner 7 months ago. One thing had led to another. The council had voted, finally, under pressure from 14 younger member species who had found the centuries-long silence embarrassing, to send an official diplomatic mission into the region marked by Precedent 0001. Senior ambassadors had been asked to volunteer. No one had. Then names had been suggested. Droveth's name had come up almost immediately, and he had a feeling he knew exactly why. The mission briefing had been very thin. It said, "Make peaceful contact. Establish communication. Return with a report." It did not say what to do if things went wrong, because the people who wrote the briefing had no idea what things going wrong would even look like. They crossed the boundary line at exactly the coordinates marked on the old Draven records. Droveth felt it before the instruments reported it. A slight change in the quality of the silence. Nothing measurable, just different. The navigation system stopped rendering the star field ahead. The display went to dead reckoning. The ship's AI, which was normally quite chatty, went quiet. 6 hours later, they were hailed. The signal was calm and clear, and in 17 languages simultaneously, cycling through them, one after another, with perfect pronunciation. It said, "IGC vessel. This is the Human Continuum Patrol Ship Steadfast Memory. Please confirm your intentions, and prepare for a welcoming escort. We have been expecting you." Droveth's communications officer looked at him with very large eyes. Droveth straightened his collar and said in his most professional voice, "Open a channel." The ship that came alongside them was enormous. Droveth had been briefed on size comparisons, but the briefing had not fully prepared him. The steadfast memory was 4 times the length of the Measured Step. Its hull was dark and had clearly seen a great deal. There were marks on it that Droveth recognized as old impact damage, repaired and painted over, but still visible as slightly different textures under the running lights. Whatever had hit that ship had hit it very hard, and it had been repaired and sent back out, and hit again somewhere else, and repaired again. A voice came over the channel. It was warm, lower in register than Droveth had expected. It said, "Ambassador Droveth, Welcome. I am Captain Sarah Okafor of the human continuum vessel Steadfast Memory. Please come aboard. We have tea ready. Droveth's second-in-command, a young analyst named Preth, leaned over and whispered, "They knew your name." Droveth was aware of that. He nodded very slightly and said nothing. They docked. The airlock opened, and standing just beyond it, in a corridor that was wide and well lit, and lined with photographs of places Droveth did not recognize, was Captain Okafor. She was tall by any standard. She wore a dark uniform with a small emblem on the chest that Droveth did not recognize. She had a smile that seemed entirely genuine, the kind of smile that did not seem to be performing anything, and she extended her hand in what Droveth knew from his briefing was a traditional human greeting gesture. He shook it. Her grip was firm, but not aggressive. She said, "We are very glad you finally came. The tea will get cold." She turned and walked down the corridor, and Droveth and his small team followed her. And Droveth spent the entire walk trying to look calm while cataloging everything he saw. The ship was clean. That was the first thing. He had expected something more. He was not sure what he had expected. Something grimmer, something more obviously scarred, but the corridors were clean and well-maintained, and there were small plants growing in containers fixed to the walls near the ceiling. The crew they passed in the corridors nodded and smiled. A few of them said hello out loud to Droveth's team, which none of them had been briefed to expect. The medical bay door was open as they passed it. Droveth looked in. It was large, much larger than the equivalent space on the measured step. It had equipment he did not recognize lining 3 of the 4 walls. The 4th wall was covered in what appeared to be handwritten notes. He could not read them. He looked away quickly. They were taken to a room that had a long table and chairs, and on a small side counter, a vessel that was producing steam. Captain Okafor poured something dark and hot into cups and set one in front of each of them. Droveth looked at his cup. A human crew member named Tesler, who had been introduced as the ship's cultural liaison, quietly told him that tea was safe for most known species, and that the captain had also prepared something called biscuits, which were small and dry and unlikely to cause problems. Droveth drank the tea. It was bitter and very warm, and he found, to his surprise, that he did not dislike it. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Captain Okafor answered every question Droveth asked, calmly, without hesitation. She did not seem to find anything remarkable about the situation. She spoke about the human continuum's territory, its population, its governing structure. She spoke about their history in broad terms, acknowledging the ashfall by name without any particular emotion, the way someone might mention a very difficult period of weather that had happened long ago. Droveth asked about the scars on the ship's hull. She told him about an encounter with something she called a deep space predator, a category of creature the IGC had no record of, that the continuum had been managing for about 400 years. She described it the way someone might describe a recurring problem with a local pest. It was enormous. They had learned how to deal with it. It was fine. Preth, who was sitting next to Droveth, had stopped writing in his notes. He was just staring. Near the end of the meeting, one of the crew members came in and spoke quietly to the captain. She nodded and looked at Droveth and said, "We've prepared quarters for your team. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. We thought you might want to see a bit of our space before you head back." Droveth said that would be very helpful. He said it in his most professional voice. That evening, after Okafor had gone to oversee something on the bridge, a human crew member named Joran found Droveth standing alone in a corridor, staring at one of the photographs on the wall. It showed a gray and cratered landscape under a pale sky. There were structures in it, old ones, half buried in dust. Joran stood beside him for a moment. Then he said quietly, "That is the old homeworld, or what is left of the surface. We still go back sometimes, to remember." Droveth looked at him. He said, because he could not help it, "We were afraid of you." Joran nodded. He did not look offended. He said, "We know. We have always known." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "We were not always sure that was unfair." Droveth stood in the corridor for a long time after Joran had gone, looking at the photograph of the gray and broken world, and thinking about all the things that the briefing had not told him. That night he began writing his report. He wrote it carefully, the way he wrote everything, but when he reached the summary section, he found that his usual careful language was not quite enough. He sat, looking at the blank space on his page, for a long time. Then he wrote, "They are not what we feared. They are stranger. And I mean that as a compliment." The IGC council chamber was full for the first time in 60 years. Every seat was taken. Every member species had sent a representative. The gallery above the main floor was packed with observers, analysts, and journalists from 40 different news organizations. The air in the room had the quality of something stretched too tight. Ambassador Droveth stood at the central speaking platform and looked out at all of them. And for a moment, he felt very tired. He had spent 3 weeks aboard the Steadfast Memory. He had come back a different person than he had left, and he was not entirely sure how to explain that to people who had not been there. He had given his report to the council in writing 5 days ago. They had read it. Now they wanted to argue about it. The argument had been going for 2 days already. The fearful bloc led by Councillor Veth Oren wanted Precedent 0001 reinstated fully, the boundary restored, no further contact. They cited the Draven records. They cited the size of the continuum ships. They cited the deep space predators that humanity had been managing for 400 years, as though that were a normal thing to do. The younger species, the ones who had pushed for the mission in the first place, wanted full integration, trade agreements, open borders, cultural exchange. They found the fear embarrassing. They said so, frequently. Droveth waited for the room to settle. Then he said, "You are both wrong." The room went quiet. He said, "The fearful bloc is wrong because what we found inside that region is not a threat. I was there. I drank their tea. I looked at their photographs. I spoke to their crew for 3 weeks. They have never been a threat to us. They have been waiting, patiently, for 800 years. They have been sending us messages and waiting for us to respond, and we did not, and they waited anyway. That is the behavior of something that understands what fear looks like, and has chosen to be kind about it." He turned to the other side of the chamber. He said, "And the integration block is wrong, because you cannot simply open a door that has been closed for this long and expect everyone to walk through it comfortably. This will take time. It will take care. There are things humanity has been through that we do not fully understand, and we cannot pretend we do just because we want the relationship to be easy." He paused. He said, "What I am asking you to do is to listen. Just listen. They have been trying to talk to us for 800 years. Perhaps we could try to hear them." He stepped down from the platform. The room was still quiet. Then the noise began again, but it was different now. Lower, more uncertain. The kind of noise a room makes when the argument it was having has changed shape. In her private log aboard the Steadfast Memory, 3 days before Droveth's speech, Captain Sarah Okafor had written the following. She wrote, "I know what the Council is doing right now. I have always known that someday a ship would come, and I have tried to imagine what the conversation after it would look like. I think it will be messy. I think there will be people on their side who are afraid, and people who are not afraid enough, and they will argue with each other for a while, and eventually something will happen. I hope it is good. I am trying to be realistic." She wrote, "I think sometimes about what we must look like from the outside, a civilization that came through the ashfall. That is what we are, in the end. Everything we have built, everything we are, comes from having survived something that should have ended us. I know how that looks. I know the Draven fleet came here and saw us and did not have words for it. I know that is why the map stops where it stops." She wrote, "What they do not understand, what I am not sure any of them can understand without living it, is that the ashfall did not make us hard. It made us careful. It made us very aware of how fragile things are. When you have watched your civilization come apart and come back together more times than you can count, across 3,000 years. You do not come out of that wanting to break other things. You come out of it very tired of breaking. You come out of it wanting to build something that lasts. She wrote, "The galaxy thinks our silence was aggression. It was not. It was grief. You cannot chart grief. You cannot put grief on a map and draw lines around it. You can only wait for it to become something you can carry." She closed the log. She went back to the bridge. In the council chamber, the debate continued. But Droveth had said what he had needed to say, and it was in the record now, and some of the people in the room were listening. In the archive on Keth Prime, Thesivon received a message from a young cartographer named Zen Arali, who had apparently been the one to find the blank space in the first place. She said simply, "I heard your report was what started all of this. I wanted to say thank you." He wrote back, "The blank space started it. You were just the one who refused to look away." In the old Subvault, the records waited in the cold and quiet. The Draven captain's report, the sealed probe data, 800 years of unanswered messages. The note from the veil, "They do not stay dead. Do not provoke. Simply wait." And in a corridor aboard the steadfast memory, a photograph hung on the wall. A gray and cratered landscape, old broken structures half buried in dust, a world that had been struck again and again for 3,000 years, and whose people had gone underground and kept the lights on, and survived. The people who lived on that world now were not the same as the ones who had first gone underground. 3,000 years changed everything. They had come out different. They had rebuilt. They had gone to the stars. They had sent polite messages to a galaxy that was afraid of them for 800 years, and they had kept the tone of those messages warm and patient and never once angry. That was the thing about people who had survived something unsurvivable. They knew what it felt like when the universe seemed too big and too dark, and you were not sure you would make it. And they did not want to be that for anyone else. In the council chamber, Councillor Veth Oren sat very still for a long time after Droveth's speech. Then he looked down at his hands. Then he looked at the screen in front of him, where the text of Droveth's report was still open. He read the last line again. "They are not what we feared. They are stranger. And I mean that as a compliment." He did not speak again that session. Outside the chamber, in a small side room, Preth the analyst was going back through his notes from the 3 weeks on the steadfast memory. He had written a great many things, details about the ship, details about the crew, details about the tea, which he had also found he did not dislike. Near the middle of his notes, he had written something and then underlined it twice without being fully sure why. He read it again now. It said, "They laugh easily. They sleep very little. They keep offering food. They have scars on their hands that are so old they have forgotten they are there. And when you tell them you are afraid of them, they nod, and they are not surprised, and they are not angry. They just look at you with something that is not quite sadness and is not quite patience, but is somewhere in between." He stared at it for a while. Then he added one more line underneath it. He wrote, "I think that look has a name. I think it is the look of someone who has been through the worst thing imaginable and come out the other side and is just glad to still be here." A year had passed. Zenarali was back at a screen full of star data, and the blank space was finally getting filled in. The assignment had come through 6 months after Droveth's speech to the council. A joint mapping expedition. 2 cartographers, one from the IGC survey department and one from the Human Continuum's own archive team. The mission was simple: map the region, properly this time. Fill in the atlas the way it should have been filled in 900 years ago, when someone had first noticed the edge and decided that leaving it blank was safer than asking questions. Zenarali had been the first IGC volunteer. She was not sure why she had volunteered so quickly. Maybe because she had been the one to find the edge in the first place, and it had never felt finished. Maybe because she was still thinking about that single word, written in 17 languages, at the end of the old prologue. Maybe just because she was curious, and she had always been the kind of person for whom curiosity was stronger than caution. Her counterpart was a human named Tobias. Tobias was shorter than she had expected, and talked more than she had expected, and had brought, on a survey mission that was supposed to last 8 months, enough bags of ground coffee to last considerably longer. He was 34 years old in human terms, which she was still doing the math on, and he had been a cartographer for 12 years, and he was very good at his job, and also very good at filling silences with observations about whatever he was currently looking at. On the first day, while they were setting up their shared mapping station, he had said, "You know, our charts cover about 60% of this region already. We have been mapping our own space since we had ships capable of doing it." He said it without any particular pride, just as a fact. Then he added, "But there are gaps. We were not always in a position to do systematic survey work." He said that part more quietly. Zenarali had nodded. She understood what he meant by not always in a position. She had read enough history in the past year to understand what the ashfall had meant for human society. 3,000 years of it. 3,000 years of rebuilding and losing ground and rebuilding again. You did not do careful cartography during something like that. You survived. You kept the lights on. You came out the other side, and then, eventually, when things had calmed enough, you looked around and started mapping what was left. The work was good. That was the part Zenarali had not fully expected. She had expected it to be meaningful and significant, but she had not expected it to simply be good work, satisfying in the quiet way that all good survey work was satisfying. Stars catalogued, composition logged, distances measured and confirmed. Tobias had a habit of narrating what he was doing as he did it, which she had found mildly irritating for the first 2 weeks, and had since come to find comfortable. He pointed out things she would have missed, not because she was less skilled, but because he knew this region in a way she did not. He knew which systems had been inhabited at various points in history and which ones still were. He knew where the old way station ruins were. He knew the names, in many cases, that the human continuum had given to stars that the IGC had no record of, because the IGC had never charted them. There were more inhabited systems than the IGC had known, not by a small amount. The human continuum was larger and older and more settled than Droveth's report had fully conveyed. And seeing it on a chart, watching the data fill in around her, Zenarali found herself sitting with that fact in a way that was hard to describe. The galaxy had not known. The galaxy had drawn a line and called it an edge, and had not known what was on the other side of it. And on the other side of it was this, all of this. In the evenings, Tobias made coffee and they talked. He was easy to talk to. He had a quality that she had noticed in most of the humans she had met in the past year. A kind of steadiness that was not the same as calmness. Calmness was the absence of disturbance. This was the quality of someone who had been disturbed, very deeply, and had found their way through it, and now had a kind of ground under them that did not shake easily. She asked him once about the ashfall. She asked carefully, not sure if it was a sensitive subject. He thought about it for a while, before answering. He said, "I did not live through it. Nobody alive today lived through it. But we all grew up with the memory of it. It is in everything we build. It is in the way we design our ships and plan our cities and stock our medical bays. It is not something you forget. It is something you carry forward." She asked, "Does it make you angry that it happened?" He was quiet for longer this time. Then he said, "Sometimes. Mostly it just makes me want to make sure the things we build now last." He drank his coffee. He said, "When you have lost everything and rebuilt it, you become very particular about foundations." The atlas grew every day. Section by section, the blank space became something else. Star names, System designations. Inhabited worlds marked in warm color. Uninhabited ones in cooler tones. Routes and distances. The region was dense with information, rich with it, and all of that information had been sitting on the other side of an arbitrary line for centuries, patient and uncatalogued, waiting. On the last day of the survey, Zenarali and Tobias sat together in front of the completed section of the atlas. The whole panel was finished, stars filled in wall to wall, nothing blank, nothing missing. The edge that had started all of this, the clean white line she had found 11 months ago, and stared at until she could not sleep, was gone. In its place was more galaxy. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Tobias and asked the question she had been sitting with for months. She asked, "Why did you never push for contact? You knew we were there. You had been sending us messages for 800 years. You could have come to us. Why did you keep waiting?" Tobias was quiet. He looked at the atlas. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. Then he said, "We remembered what it felt like. When things were bad, when we were not sure we were going to survive, the universe felt enormous and very dark, and we were very small inside it." He paused. "We did not want to be that for someone else. We did not want to be the thing that came out of the dark that someone was not ready for." He looked at her. He said, "You would have come when you were ready. We just had to wait." Zenarali looked back at the atlas, the filled-in section, the stars that had been invisible for so long, now mapped and named and placed correctly in the larger picture of everything. She pulled up the master atlas file. She found the spot where, for so long, there had been nothing. She opened the label field. She thought about the word alive in 17 languages. She thought about Droveth's face when he came back from 3 weeks aboard the Steadfast Memory. She thought about Fesavon's report, "We have been very rude," and about the Veil's note, "Simply wait," and about a gray cratered world in a photograph in a hallway. She typed, "Explored, friendly, come see." She looked at it on the screen. Tobias looked at it too. He made a quiet sound that might have been approval. She saved the file and submitted it to the IGC Central Atlas, where it would be processed and distributed to every ship and every archive and every cartographer in the known galaxy. In a few hours, every map that mattered would show what was actually there. Not an edge, not a wall, not a blank space kept deliberately empty by the oldest rule the Council had ever written. Just more galaxy, full of things worth knowing, full of a civilization that had survived the unsurvivable and come out the other side, still carrying their coffee and their photographs and their 800 years of unanswered messages, patient and warm and ready, whenever everyone else was ready too. Outside the window, the stars were the same as they had always been, cold and still and very far away. But they were on the map now, all of them. That was enough. For now, that was enough.